Right, thanks very much, folks. Welcome. So tonight I'll be talking about Carrickfergus Victoria Cemetery, and I'll be calling, as usual, at 20 graves within Carrick Victoria Cemetery. So it just so happens that the two people featured on the first slide are the first and the last headstones that I'll be calling that. They're in chronological order, and for Jim, that's means in date order. So say there's 20 of them. And I have to thank my friend Alistair Bell for taking the vast majority of the photographs, the better ones. He's not able to tune in tonight, but I'll be talking about his brother on the talk. So say 20 slides, 20 headstones, and in date order. Carrick Victoria Cemetery opened on the 10th of December 1904, and according to a plaque near the entrance, was presented to the town by Hugh G. Legg, Esquire, from Cape Town, in memory of his father and mother. So the first one is this one, and thanks to David and Susie for giving me this photograph. And happy birthday, Susie. So this commemorates Jeannie Miller and then her husband, Thomas Miller. You'll see they're lost in Titanic disaster, 15th April 1912. Thomas Miller was born 11th August 1879, and he was the son of Thomas Miller Sr., a sailor, and Agnes McGowan, and had married in 1864. Thomas served his apprenticeship with Horn and Wolff and subsequently worked for Vickers of Barrow, Workman Clark, and then later Horn and Wolff. He was married in St Mary's Church in Belfast on 1st of October 1910, and he married Jeannie Ruddock, and this is Jeannie Ruddock here. When he got married, he was described as an engineer. Thomas and Jeannie had two sons. Thomas Jr. was born on the 9th of February 1901, and William was born 5th March 1907. By the time of the 1911 census, Thomas and his family were resident at 14 Hillman Street in the Dock Ward, and he was described as a fitter, reportedly helping build the engines for both Olympic and Titanic. Thomas became a widower when he was living at 27 Hillman Street, and when his wife Jenny Pictured there died aged only 32 as a result of pulmonary tuberculosis. And she appears to be the only committal in this plot, and she's recorded as mentioned there as Jeannie Miller, who died on 18th January 1912. Thomas then decided to go to sea shortly after his wife's premature death, leaving his sons with an aunt. Before he left on Titanic, he gave each of his sons 2 new pennies, which are still in the possession of the family. And the pennies featured in Thomas's great-granddaughter Susie Miller's book, The Two Pennies. So there is the front cover of the birthday girl's book, one of the birthday girl's books, Susie Miller's book, The Two Pennies, and then to the left is Thomas himself. And Thomas signed on to Titanic in Southampton on 6th April 1912. He was described as a deck engineer, and his previous ship was listed as the Gotland, and the Titanic was reportedly only his second sea voyage. Thomas Miller died in the sinking, and his body, if recovered, was never identified. So again, that's the headstone there, and so you can see, so Jeannie is the only burial in the plot, and then Thomas is commemorated there. The next one then is this one. It's Commonwealth Wargrave, and it commemorates William Ruddy. And Royal Garrison Artillery, died 24th April 1915. So he wasn't killed as a result of direct service in the Great War, but he died during the Great War, and this is his story. He was stationed with the Royal Garrison Artillery at Kilroot Fort. On Saturday, 24th April 1915, he and Private James O'Hara left the fort at 5 p.m. and walked along the railway track into Whitehead to have a few drinks at the Railway Tavern. At the inquest after his death, after William's death, at Whitehead Railway Station, Private O'Hara stated that they had begun their return journey at around 8 p.m. and had reached Briggs Loop by 8:40 p.m. Whilst William Ruddy had a midnight pass, James O'Hara had to be back in camp by 9:30, so he hurried ahead of Ruddy. O'Hara stated that Ruddy was well acquainted with the neighbourhood, had some drink taken, but was quite capable of taking care of himself. David Girvin, an engine driver, stated to the inquest that his train left Whitehead at 9 p.m. and he felt the engine roaring near Briggs Loop. He examined the engine at Kilroot and found everything was all right. At Greencastle, whilst the tickets were being collected, he again examined the engine and found traces of blood and hair on the front of the engine. He wired to Whitehead and reported that he had passed over some object near Briggs Loop. William Porter, who was the head porter at Whitehead, and a couple of permanent waymen searched the railway track and found the body of the soldier, William Ruddy. So that's a sad case of he's basically walked along the railway line for a shortcut and sadly didn't make it back. So the next one then is also a Commonwealth war grave. Again, it's not someone who died as a direct result of their service. Or sorry, they weren't killed in action as such, but it commemorates Major William Hamilton Davy, OBE, and you can see there to the right there's a bit of a closer up shot of the headstone. So he was serving with it. He died on the 29th of August 1920, aged 40. He was born on 15th August 1880 and became a barrister and then editor of the Ulster Guardian. He was living at Green Street in Carrick when he married Ruby Irene Mullen at Fisherwick Presbyterian Church in Belfast on 7th June 1911. At the outbreak of the war, William Davy joined the Officers Training Corps attached to Queen's University and received a commission with the Northumberland Fusiliers in 1915. He served in the Western Front with the 27th Tyneside Irish Battalion and contracted blood poisoning during the war. William Davy was a Presbyterian and an Irish nationalist who supported a home rule government for Ireland within the United Kingdom. Just days after the armistice in 1918, he returned home to stand as a pro-home rule candidate for the Irish Parliamentary Party in the Duncairn constituency in Belfast. The election was held on 14th December 1918, and Major Davy, who received 17% of the vote, was defeated by the Irish Unionist Party candidate Sir Edward Carson. During the course of the campaign, Sir Edward Carson mistakenly referred to Major Davy as a Sinn Féiner, which led to damages being awarded to Major Davy in his subsequent legal action for slander. Major Davy relinquished his commission in March 1919, and in March 1920, the London Gazette announced that Major Davy had been made an officer in the Order of the British Empire for valuable services in connection with recruiting in Ireland. William Davy died at his home on Bonmore Road off the Lisburn Road in Belfast on 30th August 1920 at the age of 40. Chronic periodontitis, an infection of the teeth, had developed into bacterial endocarditis, an infection of the inner lining of the heart, which resulted in his death. So there's a man who had a court case against Sir Edward Carson. Perhaps Edward Carson's best known in his early days for the prosecution of Oscar Wilde, and yet this man Davy has won. William Hamilton Davy won a case against Carson. So later on in the talk, I'll mention a number of fatalities from the most recent Troubles. But this man here is a victim of from the 1920s Troubles. And if anybody's interested in, I did a talk previously, just focusing on local victims buried locally who died as a result of the 1920s Troubles, and this is one. So you'll see, in loving memory, the headstone was erected in loving memory of my dear husband Francis Alexander Hill, RIC, Royal Irish Constabulary. who died 19th January 1922, the result of wounds received in the execution of his duty, aged 31 years. Constable Hill was a native of County Leitrim and a 12-year service. And on the 27th of December 1921, he was commanding a patrol of special constables on the Old Park Road in Belfast when they saw a suspicious group of men at the corner of Grace Hill Street. Gunfire was exchanged and the Constable Hill was hit, dying in the military hospital more than 3 weeks later. Tragically, as some of you might have noticed there on the headstone, also buried in this grave are Francis's dear children, Francis Alwyn Cecil and Amelia Elizabeth Irene, who died 25th August 1921, aged 2 months. This is the next one. Ardeen Smith, who's logged in, she knows all about this one. So this commemorates Private James Cameron, 21st Independent Parachute Company, died 26th September 1944 from wounds received in action at the Battle of Arnhem, and was interred in Appledorn and aged 22 years. The Battle of Arnhem was a major battle of the Second World War at the vanguard of the Allied Operation Market Garden, fought from 17th to the 26th of September 1944. Allied airborne troops were dropped in the Netherlands to secure key bridges and towns along the Allied axis of advance. Furthest north, the British 1st Airborne Division landed at Arnhem to secure bridges over the Netherrhine. The British airborne forces landed some distance from their objectives and were hampered by unexpected resistance, especially from elements of the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions. Only a small force was able to reach the Arnhem Road Bridge, whilst the main body of the division was halted on the outskirts of the town. After 4 days, the small British force at the bridge was overwhelmed, and the rest of the division became trapped north of the river. After 9 days of fighting, the shattered remains of the division were withdrawn in Operation Berlin. So it's appropriate at this stage to mention Adrian Hack's tours, wartime-related tours, walking tours of Carrickfergus. And so, Adrian, you might want to mention that at the end of my talk. The Battle of Arnhem at Bridge Operation Market Garden, was of course made famous in the film A Bridge Too Far. So Ardeen Smith, he has provided me just within the last hour this photograph, and that is her at the grave of James Cameron back in 2009. Yes, and James's mother was the sister of Ardeen's grandfather. So when Holland was liberated, some school children adopted a soldier's grave. 2 sisters adopted James Cameron's grave and began writing to his family. Then later they visited Carrickfergus many times. The older sister, each time they were treated as VIPs and photos appeared in the local newspapers. So Ardeen's aunt then wrote to the eldest sister, then Ardeen's mum, and then now Ardeen herself writes to the sisters. And so that photograph there from 2009 was taken when Ardeen attended a special ceremony at the cemetery in Holland. And when the children adopted the graves, they were nicknamed the Flower Children. So maybe Ardeen, you'll mention at the end as well, if you want to mention anything further to that. So that's Private James Cameron. The next one then is this man, and he is James McAllister. And you'll see there he died as about the middle of the headstone, died result of accident on MV Rhino del Pacifico, 12th September 1947, aged 26 years. Rhino del Pacifico was built by Harland Wolff for the Pacific Steam Navigation Company, and it was the largest and fastest motor liner of her time. In 1947, after service during the Second World War, she was taken in hand at Queen's Island. When the refit had been carried out, the liner crossed to the Clyde for speed trials, which were completed satisfactorily on 11th September 1947. During the return voyage to Belfast, while speed was being increased, all 4 engines exploded without warning, killing 28 people, including James. So the explosion took place on the 11th of September, whereas James passed away the following day, aged only 26. So quite a few victims of the Rhino del Pacifico disaster are buried in Donald Cemetery. And in my book about the cemetery, there is a chapter there just dedicated to the victims of the disaster. So that's a victim of the Rhino del Pacifico disaster. So the next one is also shipping fatality. Oh, sorry, and that's a photograph of the Rhino del Pacifico. So I think it was a British Prime Minister, ex-British Prime Minister, possibly Ramsay MacDonald, died on board the Rhino del Pacifico. So the next one to say is it also related to a shipping disaster, and you'll see just near the end of the headstone there that commemorates Wolsey William Patterson, lost his life on MV Princess Victoria, 31st January 1953. The next couple of slides, next 3 slides, sorry, I'll talk about victims of the Princess Victoria disaster. Wolsey married his wife Davina, originally from Edinburgh, in 1952, in other words, less than a year before he died. And they lived in West Street in Carrick. He had served with the RAF, and after he was demobbed, was employed by Short Brothers in Harland at their Belfast factory, before transferring to their Wigday factory, in other words, outside Stranraer. It is alleged that Wolsey was to bring Davina on the trip with him, but changed his mind at the last minute. Also buried in this grave are Wolsey's parents and brother, Henry Thomas Patterson, who died on 8th October 1983, but not Davina. So that suggests that she might have perhaps returned to Scotland after her husband's untimely death. I go into a little bit more detail about Wolsey Patterson in my book called 2020. And each of the chapters has a sketch of someone that features in the respective chapter. So this is a sketch done by my friend. That's a sketch of Wolsey Patterson, David Francis. So that's Wolsey Patterson. The next one then is also a victim of the Princess Victoria disaster. You'll see at the bottom, commemorating Samuel McReynolds, died as a result of the Princess Victoria disaster in 1953. Samuel McMaster Reynolds was a 37-year-old electrician, also employed, like Wolsey Patterson, at the Short Brothers and Harland aircraft factory at Wigby. He worked there for almost 2 years. He lived at Rosebrook in Carrickfergus with his wife and 8 children. You'll see there on the headstone that perhaps his father was a member of the Masons. So that's another victim of the Princess Victoria disaster who's buried in Carrick. The final one we'll talk about from the Princess Victoria disaster is this one, Jane Hannah. And Jane, this was previously on an unmarked grave, and this plaque was put up relatively recently. Jane Hannah was a widow, and her husband had previously worked on the railway. I think he was stationed at Troopers Lane. And so Jane was visiting relatives in Glasgow. She wrote a letter to her daughter asking to be picked up from Carrick train station on her return, where she would have presents for her 2 granddaughters. So sadly, Jane's daughter and 2 granddaughters turned up at the Carrick railway station, but sadly Jane didn't, because she went down with the Princess Victoria. So it's unusual that I know of quite a number of victims of the Princess Victoria disaster who are buried in unmarked graves. I can think of 3, for example, 3 separate ones in Donald, which are all unmarked. So it's good to see that at least this family, the Hannah family, have put a plaque up to commemorate Jane, even though she died so many years ago. So the next one then, that's from 1953. The next one is through to 1972. and this is a Commonwealth War Grave Commission-like headstone. It commemorates Private H.J. Russell, Henry Russell, Ulster Defence Regiment, 13th July 1972, aged 21. Private Russell was a Catholic part-time member of A Company, whose body was found in a lane off Larkfield Drive at Sydenham, East Belfast. He had been badly beaten, stabbed and shot whilst off duty, and when found, he was only clothed in his underwear and a tie. Private Russell had previously served in the RAF and was married with 2 children at the time of his death. So the next one then is this man, and it's Bobby McCabe. He died in 1974. So, but I'm going to talk about him when he was during the Second World War. He was aged 20 and he was serving on HMS Hardy. This is HMS Hardy. And at the First Battle of Narvik in April 1940. So Hardy sank a German destroyer, but when the British ships were withdrawing, they were discovered by 2 other German destroyers, which damaged Hardy so badly that she had to be run aground to stop her sinking, although eventually the vessel capsized. Hit by shrapnel during the battle, Bobby plunged into the icy waters, and as he swam ashore, he noticed another shipmate, Tubby Cox, floating unconscious in the water and dragged him to safety, later teasing Tubby that he only floated because of his size. With his fellow survivors, Bobby met Winston Churchill and was recognised by a presentation in Carrickfergus. Bobby was one of 6 men from the same family who fought in the Second World War, becoming known as the Fighting McCabe, as they represented the Army, Navy and Air Force, with all thankfully surviving the war. Bobby stayed in the Navy until 1960 and rose to the rank of petty officer, eventually leaving the Navy and working at Court Halls in Carrick. It was at Court Halls in factory in 1974 that Bobby sadly suffered a heart attack and died aged only 54. So Bobby McCabe is related to my friend Paul McCusker, who lives in Carrick. So he alerted me to that. And then Andrew McCabe has also told me that there's an article recently, he showed me the article in the Carrick papers talking about the Fighting McCabe. So their story is thankfully not forgotten. So I mentioned Tubby Cox. So this is Tubby Cox here, and he is making sure that all his crewmates are shipshape and proper before Winston Churchill inspects them. And this is Winston Churchill then. So after Tubby had done the warm-up, then the main man came along, Winston Churchill. This is the next one then. This is Alistair's brother. And it just says at the bottom of the top of the grave, loved, and then it says Colin David Bell, died 21st June 1980, aged 18 years. We'll try to read out what Alistair said about his brother. So he was known as David, and he was born 18th May 1962 and died, as it says in the headstone there, 21st June 1980, shortly after his 18th birthday. He would never really have known his parents, my mother and Alistair's mother and father, well, as they died in July and August 1966, within 3 weeks of each other, when David had just turned 4. David and Alistair and their 2 older brothers and a sister were then brought up by their eldest full sister, Carol, and her husband, Billy, who were not long married at the time. So Alistair and David also had 3 half-brothers and a half-sister from their father's previous marriage, and they were older. So Carol and Billy also went on to have 3 children of their own. So Alistair says it was a full house. David died of subacute sclerosing panencephalus, known as SSPE, which is a progressive neurological disorder and inflammation of the brain, which stems from a reactivation of the measles virus. There's no cure, and it is always fatal. Most children die within 1 to 3 years of diagnosis. Most people die within 1 to 3 years of diagnosis. David survived a little longer, but unfortunately meant longer suffering too. He was diagnosed at the age of around 14 after a spinal tap, after his schoolwork had started to deteriorate. He had motor neuron problems and he had become unable to do simple tasks. Alistair describes it as the most horrible of diseases, watching someone regress from a normal teenager or almost an adult to basically a baby, having to be dressed, undressed, spoon-fed, and put into nappies, and all with other motor neuron problems like falling over when walking. Alistair said David had to be strapped into a chair during the day as he'd otherwise get up and wander off with the danger of falling over and banging his head. He also had to be strapped into a special hospital-style bed with high raised sides at night, as again he might try to wander off. In the last year or so, he would wake up every night screaming, and Alistair then would come down to comfort him and get him to settle down again. The horrible memories of David's suffering, but Alistair also remembers that he was a great spitter. So for some reason, if someone tried to walk past David in his chair, he would shout no and then fire a great gob at them and then start laughing. He was extremely accurate and could fire one right across the room. You had to be quick to avoid it, but at least David got some fun and thought it was funny. So at the end, David caught flu and passed away in his sleep, which was probably a blessing for his suffering. So that's Colin David Bell, Alistair Bell's brother. And again, thanks to Alistair for taking all these photographs, or a lot of these photographs, including the one of this one. So this is the next one then. This commemorates Norman Montgomery, who died as a result of an accident, 20th of October, which is my birthday, 1980, aged 22 years. Norman Montgomery was fatally injured when his police Land Rover in which he was travelling collided with a lorry in Belfast city centre. Also killed in the same incident were his colleagues Joanne Margaret Best, who was aged 21, Patrick Francis Collins, who was aged 34, Brian Harris, 23, and Paul Mason, aged 20. So 5 guys killed in an early morning accident whilst involving their police Land Rover. So essentially there was it collided with a bread lorry around the junction of Ormeau Avenue and Ormeau Road. So that's Norman Montgomery. If anybody knows Carrick Cemetery reasonably well, and if they know where that headstone is, if next time you're there, maybe have a look at the RUC logo on the grave, because it actually is missing the T in the Ulster. So it actually just says Ulcer Constabulary, which is a bit strange to say the least.
What's the date again, Peter, of that death?
28th of October, 1980.
Thank you.
So this is the next one then, sorry, and this is Thomas J. Patterson, OBE JP, who died 30th January 1981, Freeman, Alderman and Mayor of this borough for 22 years and council member for over 50 years. And this is Councillor Patterson here. He's worth noting because serving as the mayor of a particular town for more than 20 years seems to me anyway that remains a record, even beating the record of Sir Crawford McCulloch, and the famous Crawford McCulloch, who is buried in Carnmoney Cemetery. And there's been a recent book out about him called Belfast Dick Whittington, because he was Lord Mayor so much. Thomas was predeceased by his wife, his dearly loved wife, Kate, who died 16th March 1972. So the next couple are also RUC victims. This is in an area in the cemetery set aside for members of the Catholic faith, and it commemorates Paul Hilary McFerrin, Royal Ulster Constabulary Reserve. He died 28th of February 1985. Reserve Constable McFerrin was one of 9 RUC officers killed in a mortar bomb attack on the RUC base in Newry on the 20th of February 1985. The attack was the highest death toll ever suffered in one incident by the RUC, and afterwards a major building scheme was begun to give police and military bases better protection from such attacks. This is Reserve Constable McFerrin here. He was aged 33 when he died. He served in the RAF for 9 years before joining the RUC Reserve in 1983, and Newry was his first station. His funeral took place at St Nicholas's Roman Catholic Church in Carrick, and he was survived by his son Christopher, fiancée Valerie, brother Jim, and sister-in-law. So from looking at the grave, it doesn't say killed in the execution of his duty, which it sometimes does in the next case. But you'll see the RUC logo. The next one then is Sergeant Peter John Kilpatrick. You'll see they're murdered in the execution of his duty on 20th of July 1986. And the RUC logo is at the top of the headstone, and then at the bottom of the headstone are the words "Tomorrow is promised to no one." And this is Peter Kilpatrick here. He was killed along with two fellow RUC officers, Charles Allen and Carl Blackburn, when IRA volunteers opened fire from close range on their stationary armoured patrol car in Newry, firing 6 shots into the car through an open door before throwing a grenade into the car. Sergeant Kilpatrick was buried following a funeral service at Joymount Presbyterian Church and was survived by his wife Yvonne and baby son Ryan Peter. In a newspaper interview after her husband's murder, Mrs. Kilpatrick, Yvonne, recalled how she declined her elderly father's offer to assist her whilst walking behind the coffin, stating, "I wanted to walk alone, to hold my head up high, and my last gift to him," in other words, her husband, "was dignity." So that's the lady that Yvonne Kilpatrick, who whilst under the most extreme stress, behaved with admirable dignity. Also buried, and there's a number of other members of the RUC buried in Carrick Victoria Cemetery, some killed as a result of accidents, but also buried, and I don't have a photograph of his headstone at the moment, is Robert Guthrie. He was aged 41 when he was shot dead by the IRA while driving his car into the rear entrance of the police base on the Antrim Road in Belfast on 23rd June 1987. And it's rumoured that he stopped to let a couple with a pram going past, and then the gun was produced out of the pram. So sadly, another victim of the Troubles here, and my thanks to Russell Grant for pointing this one out to me. Sorry, and Andrew McCabe. This commemorates Cyril John Smith, Royal Irish Rangers. He died 24th October 1990, aged 21. He was serving with the 4th Platoon B Company, 2nd Battalion Royal Irish Rangers, and he was manning a permanent vehicle checkpoint at Clogul Mountain, situated on the A1 to the south of Newry. At 4:09 in the morning, a yellow van pulled up at the checkpoint, and the driver leapt from the van, shouting, "There's a bomb." Ranger Smith, who was the duty roadman, led the driver to safety, whilst alerting the other soldiers who were manning the checkpoint. Certain that the driver was safe, Ranger Smith ran back to the centre of the checkpoint despite being told not to go. He set off shouting, "I have to go back and make sure the rest of the boys are safe." As Ranger Smith again ran past the van, the bomb exploded, killing him instantly. Ranger Smith acted without regard for his own safety, thinking only of saving the lives of his fellow Rangers. For his action, he was, on the 5th of November 1991, posthumously awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal, and you'll see that's mentioned on his headstone, in recognition of his bravery. The entry in the supplement to the London Gazette on the 5th November 1981 stated, the Queen has been graciously pleased to approve the posthumous award of the Queen's Gallantry Medal to the under-mentioned Cyril J. Smith in recognition of gallantry in Northern Ireland. So again, that's a close-up of Ranger Smith's there on the headstone. So tragic waste of young life. So the next one then is, there's only 3 more to go, and this one jumped out at me a little bit because it's quite quirky. And this commemorates Frankie Campbell. You'll see their loving husband, dad, and granda died 4th March 2010. Frankie won a bowls bronze medal in the men's fours at the 1982 Commonwealth Games in Brisbane, along with Sammy Allen, Willie Watson, and John McLaughlin. And his headstone contains the image of a bowler to the right, top right, as well as a reference to the 1982 Commonwealth Games. Frankie appears to be the only committal in this plot. So the next Commonwealth Games was in 1986 in Edinburgh, and the McCabe clan hit Edinburgh. Peebles, to be precise. So 2 more to go. This is the next one, and this is Robert Austin Ardill, MC Military Cross. So Ardill served in the Royal Irish Fusiliers from 1939 to 1946, winning the Military Cross for his bravery on the Greek island of Leros, and was a prisoner of war for 18 months, retiring as a captain. After the war, he became involved with the Ulster Unionist Party and was elected as a member of Larne Rural District Council. In 1965, he was elected as a member of the Parliament of Northern Ireland, representing Carrick, losing the Ulster Unionist Party nomination in 1969. In 1973, he was elected to the Northern Ireland Assembly, representing South Antrim, and in September 1979, he stood in the UP leadership election but lost to Jim Molyneux. Ardill also served as chairman of the Irish Temperance League. I hope you're listening, Jim Hamilton, and briefly returned to politics in the late 1990s, campaigning against the Belfast Agreement. His wife, Molly, she predeceased him sadly, and she served on Carrickfergus Council as an Ulster Unionist Party candidate, then an independent unionist, and then a Conservative councillor, and she reached the post of deputy mayor, and she died in 22nd of September 2003, whereas Robert died 12th October 2010. So the last one then, the last year of the, oh sorry, that's Robert Ardill there in later life, commemorating a poppy wreath laying ceremony, and that photograph was taken from the Diocese of Down and Connor's website. So this is the last one. I mentioned earlier that the 2 images on the title slide were the first and the final graves that I'll be calling that, and this is Ben Robinson. So you'll see there on the headstone says precious memories of Benjamin Peter, born 29th May 1996, died 31st January 2001, 11th right, for age 14. A truly amazing son and brother, forever lived and sorely missed by all. And then at the bottom of on the headstone there, the base of the headstone says, I carry your heart, I carry it on in my heart. And then another plaque at the bottom of the grave remembers Benjamin, awesome, loving, vibrant. And this is a close-up. Well, this is the image which also features on the grave. So Ben was the first person in Northern Ireland recognised to have died from what is now known as second impact syndrome. Ben was sent back into action at a junior rugby match between his school, Carrick Grammar, and Dalriada for a further 25 minutes after sustaining a severe blow to the head during a match on 29th January 2011. The teenager died of his injuries 2 days later in the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. In 2016, Ben's parents began legal action for negligence, against a host of rugby organisations, and that was the first of its kind in Northern Ireland concerning a death due to second impact syndrome. According to Ben's father, Peter, there were numerous opportunities for those in charge to notice that Benjamin had sustained several concussion-type head injuries, and therefore the coach of the schoolboy rugby team and the referee should have been aware, or should have had the means of being aware, that concussion is dangerous and could result in death. So, thankfully, the dangers of concussion are now widely acknowledged in a range of contact sports, including rugby. So that's the sad story of Ben Robinson, who died at age only 14. So next week, I'm going to be talking about Knockbreda Cemetery and telling the stories of 20 women, including these women featured in these images. So the lady to the left is my great Granny Mays, and she was a good judge of character because she always preferred my brother. And then to the right then is Julie Rolston. She's tuned in today, and that is her dad. There, the little fella, and then that's her granny. Then, so we'll be mentioning both of those graves next week. So Tuesday, 15th of June 2000. Well, at 7 p.m. So we talked about those two remarkable women and 18 others. So of course, have to shamelessly plug my book, my latest book, and this is a 2020 book, obviously due out last year, and it features 20 graves in each of 20 different local cemeteries, and one of those cemeteries is Carrickfergus Cemetery. So a lot of those graves that I'll talked about tonight will feature in the book, but not all of them actually. So I'm going to put the order in for that book now that I've cleared it this week. That's all, folks.